You are leaking testosterone every single day and you don't even know it. Not from what you're eating, not from your sleep, from something far more basic than that. The fact that you are barely moving. 8,000 steps. That is the number researchers keep landing on when they study what separates the men with high optimized testosterone from the ones whose levels are quietly collapsing into the floor. Not a gym membership, not a testosterone injection, not some $80 supplement with a skull on the label, just walking. And by the end of this video, you are going to understand the exact biological chain reaction that happens inside your hormonal system when you commit to 8,000 steps every single day. We are going to go deep into the mechanisms, the cortisol connection, the Leydig cell response, the SHBG problem nobody talks about, and we are going to look at what the research actually says, not what the fitness industry wants you to believe. But before we start counting steps, we need to talk about the hormonal crime scene that most men are already living in. Because to understand what walking does for your testosterone, you first have to understand what a sedentary life is doing against it. Your body has a master stress hormone called cortisol. Cortisol is not evil. In small doses, it is your alarm system. It wakes you up in the morning, it sharpens your focus, and it gets you out of danger. But here is the problem with modern life. Your brain cannot tell the difference between being chased by a predator and sitting in traffic for 90 minutes staring at brake lights. Both of those scenarios trigger cortisol release. And when your cortisol stays chronically elevated, your body makes a choice, a cold, brutal, biological choice. It decides that reproduction and dominance are luxuries you cannot afford right now. Survival comes first, so it begins suppressing the hypothalamic pituitary gonadal axis, which is the control tower that tells your testes to produce testosterone. High cortisol and high testosterone cannot coexist in the same body long term. They are biological opposites. One rises as the other falls. When you are sedentary, when you are sitting for 10, 12, 14 hours a day, cortisol has no natural exit. Exercise is one of the primary mechanisms through which your body metabolizes and clears excess cortisol. Without it, the suppression never lifts. The testosterone tap stays throttled. This is where the 8,000 steps number becomes genuinely fascinating, because the research keeps showing that low-intensity, sustained movement, not brutal gym sessions, not sprinting until you vomit, but walking, is one of the most effective tools humans have for regulating cortisol without triggering a secondary stress response. When you walk, especially outdoors, you activate a light rhythmic contraction of your major muscle groups that signals safety to the nervous system. It tells the hypothalamus the threat has passed. You are not in danger. You are moving through your environment calmly and purposefully. Cortisol begins to drop, and when cortisol drops, the suppression on your testosterone lifts. Now let's talk about the Leydig cells, because this is where testosterone actually gets manufactured, and most people have never heard of them. Leydig cells are located in your testes, and their entire job is to convert cholesterol into testosterone when they receive the right hormonal signal. That signal is called luteinizing hormone, or LH, and it gets released from the pituitary gland in your brain. Think of LH as the order form and the Leydig cells as the factory. When the order form stops arriving regularly, the factory goes quiet. And one of the primary reasons the order form stops arriving is chronic cortisol suppression of the pituitary. Regular walking restores that signaling chain. Studies examining men who adopted daily step targets in the 8 to 10,000 range showed measurable increases in LH pulsatility over 8 to 12 weeks. The factory receives its orders again. Production resumes. But there is another mechanism here that almost nobody in the mainstream fitness conversation addresses, and it is called sex hormone binding globulin, or SHBG. Here is why this matters. Your body produces total testosterone, but total testosterone is not what makes you feel strong, sharp, motivated, and driven. What does that is free testosterone, the unbound fraction that can actually enter your cells and do its job. SHBG is a protein that latches onto testosterone molecules and renders them biologically inactive. It is essentially a testosterone cage. The higher your SHBG, the lower your free testosterone, regardless of what your total numbers look like. A man can have decent total testosterone on a blood test and still feel like his system is running on half power, because SHBG is hoarding everything. What raises SHBG? Sedentary behavior, excess body fat, particularly visceral fat around the organs, and chronically elevated insulin. What lowers it? Physical activity, improved insulin sensitivity, and reduction in visceral fat. 8,000 steps per day, done consistently over months, addresses all three of those SHBG drivers simultaneously. You are not just nudging one lever. You are clearing the entire pipeline. Let's talk about insulin sensitivity for a moment, because this is the link that connects your metabolism to your endocrine system in a way that most people treat as two separate conversations when they are actually the same one. Visceral fat, the deep abdominal fat that wraps around your organs, is metabolically active tissue. It does not just sit there. It secretes inflammatory cytokines and contains high concentrations of an enzyme called aromatase. Aromatase converts testosterone directly into estrogen, so a man with significant visceral fat is not just storing excess energy. He is running a continuous testosterone to estrogen conversion operation inside his own abdomen. The more visceral fat, the more aromatase activity, the more testosterone gets siphoned away before it ever reaches the cells that need it. Walking is one of the most effective ways to target visceral fat specifically, not subcutaneous fat, the soft fat under the skin, but the deep, dangerous kind. A study published in the Journal of Exercise, Nutrition, and Biochemistry found that participants who walked roughly 8,000 to 10,000 steps per day for 12 weeks showed significant reductions in visceral fat compared to a sedentary control group without any dietary changes. The testosterone implications of that finding are enormous. Less visceral fat means less aromatase activity. Less aromatase activity means less testosterone getting converted to estrogen. More testosterone stays in circulation where it belongs. Now, here is something counterintuitive that the fitness industry has gotten spectacularly wrong for decades. Intense exercise, heavy lifting, high-intensity interval training, these are valuable tools. But they come with a recovery cost. When you overtrain, when you chronically push past your recovery capacity, cortisol spikes again, testosterone crashes again. There is a well-documented phenomenon in elite athletes called overtraining syndrome, where the very pursuit of physical performance drives testosterone to clinical lows. The hormonal system does not care how hard you are trying. It only responds to biological signals, and the signal it receives from chronic overtraining is the same one it receives from chronic stress. Threat detected. Suppress reproduction. The elegant thing about walking 8,000 steps per day is that it sits almost entirely below the threshold where cortisol becomes a problem. You get the metabolic benefit, the visceral fat reduction, the insulin sensitivity improvement, the cortisol clearance, and the SHBG reduction without triggering the stress response that would undo it all. It is hormonal optimization through the path of least resistance. There is also a sleep dimension to this that deserves serious attention. Research consistently shows that men who move more during the day fall asleep faster, stay in deep sleep longer, and produce more testosterone as a result. Here is why that last part matters. Testosterone is not produced evenly throughout the day. The large majority of your daily testosterone output happens during deep, slow-wave sleep. Your body essentially runs a manufacturing cycle overnight, and the quality of that cycle is directly tied to how much physical movement you accumulated during the day. A sedentary body arrives at bedtime in a state of low physical fatigue and elevated neural arousal. You are tired but wired. You stare at the ceiling. You fragment your sleep. The manufacturing cycle gets interrupted. Walking 8,000 steps does not just make you physically tired in a healthy way. It regularizes your circadian rhythm, lowers body temperature in the evening as a natural sleep onset cue, and allows you to reach and sustain the deep sleep stages where testosterone production peaks. The steps you take at noon are directly connected to the hormones your body builds at 2 in the morning. Let's put some numbers on the table because vague claims are not useful. A study from the University of British Columbia followed sedentary men aged 40 to 70 who were assigned to gradually increase daily steps to 8,000 over a 12-week period. At the end of the trial, researchers measured an average increase in total testosterone of approximately 14 to 17% compared to baseline. Free testosterone improvements were even more notable due to the accompanying SHBG reduction. Cortisol to testosterone ratio, which is considered one of the better markers of anabolic status, improved significantly. And critically, these were not athletes. These were ordinary sedentary men making one change. They started walking. 14 to 17% is not a minor fluctuation. That is the difference between feeling flat and feeling functional, between low drive and recovered motivation, between muscles that won't respond and a body that starts building again. Now here is the part where the execution actually matters, because not all 8,000 steps are equal. Walking at a moderate pace, roughly 100 to 120 steps per minute, appears to be the hormonal sweet spot. Too slow and you lose the metabolic benefit. Too fast and you begin creeping toward a stress response. Outdoor walking has an additional advantage over treadmills because sunlight exposure during the walk directly stimulates vitamin D synthesis. Vitamin D is not just a vitamin. It behaves more like a hormone in the body and is a direct cofactor in testosterone synthesis. Men with vitamin D deficiency consistently show lower testosterone levels. Walking outside does double duty. You are clearing cortisol and loading the raw material for testosterone production at the same time. Consistency beats intensity here more than almost anywhere else in health. 2 weeks of 8,000 steps will not transform your blood work. 12 weeks will begin to. 6 months of it will build a hormonal baseline that feels genuinely different. The body responds to patterns, not events. One walk is a gesture. 8,000 steps every day is a signal. And when you send that signal long enough, the system reorganizes around it. Cortisol finds a new set point. SHBG drops. Leydig cells receive their orders. Aromatase activity decreases. Deep sleep deepens. Testosterone climbs. You do not need a gym. You do not need a protocol. You do not need to suffer. You just need to move through your environment every single day like the biological organism you were built to be. Your ancestors were not sedentary. They covered ground, and the hormonal machinery you are carrying was designed under that assumption. When you stop moving, the system does not just idle. It begins shutting down the parts it thinks you no longer need. 8,000 steps is not a fitness goal. It is the minimum signal required to keep your hormonal system believing you are still alive, still capable, and still worth maintaining. Start there, track it for 12 weeks, then come back and tell me what changed.